This is Austin Liti Limits, where authors talk to authors about books and the craft of storytelling. Sponsored by Blue Ink Review, because typing the end is just the beginning. Find out more at blueinkreview.com. Kimberly Garza was born in Galveston. She grew into her boots, raised in Uvalde, and thought she was going to follow her parents into the medical profession. Instead, she got degrees in English, Spanish, and creative writing from UT Austin and the University of North Texas. The Last Carrancabas is her first novel.
Welcome to the show, Kimberly Garza.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Scott.
Oh, you're welcome. So I was just saying before, I had just finished your book over the weekend, The Last Carrancabas. Really enjoyed it.
Thank
So
you.
the main character, Carly, she's half Filipina, half Mexicana. And in the community of Fish Village, there's these two cultures, and she's kind of personified as both because she is half. And although the cultures are very similar, they're at odds a little bit. They're like suspicious of each other. So can you talk about this conundrum in Carly?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I wanted to do there, and because like Carly, that's my genetic makeup as well. My father's Mexican American and my mother was from the Philippines. And I find it so fascinating, the many similarities that are between the two cultures, but I wanted to also showcase the places where they diverge a bit. I think in something like a narrative about immigrant populations or ethnic populations, it's very easy to kind of say, kind of lump them together and say like, well, there's the people of color and then there's the Anglo people. And I liked showing the ways that they all had their own distinct biases and prejudices and beliefs, and the places where those would clash a little bit. And I really just kind of liked the idea of making Carly this embodiment of these clashings, right? Like this space where she could be physically as a human, that she's kind of got conflict built into her, because that's going to really dictate so much of what happens to her in the book, and the things that she wants and the things that she chooses to follow and to believe. And so that just felt right to me, to kind of showcase the places where there's a little bit of a clash, but also really showcase the ways in which they're much more alike than they think. And when it really kind of gets down to it, there's a lot of similarities.
Right. I would think a lot of people don't know that folks from the Philippines have Spanish surnames, a lot of Spanish spoken in the Philippines. So even though it's an Asian country, the Spanish went there a long time ago.
Yes. Yeah, they were colonized by the Spanish. So my mother's last name was Rivera, and a lot of the Tagalog language has Spanish incorporated, and English, I should say, because English also occupied them. But has it's a blend of Spanish and English as well, as native Filipino. And they're very, colonized by Spain. They're very Catholic. They tend to be very Catholic. And just, kind of appearance wise, brown skin. And there was just a lot of really interesting similarities, and places where they cross cultures quite a bit, that I've grown up thinking was very normal to I witnessed it all the time, but I learned more and more that that's surprising to a lot of people. So it's just something I wanted to showcase a bit.
Right. I really love the character of Magdalena and Carly. I love their relationship. And I'm going to diverge here for a real quick second. So one of the reasons why I really like this relationship, because Magdalena feels like she's a descendant of the Carrancabas, who are an ancient native tribe. And my great-grandmother told my family that she had some Cherokee in her. So, and this was family history for a very long time. My great-grandmother told me this, my grandmother told me this, my mother told me this. They all said this.
Yeah.
I had a DNA test done a few years ago, and I do not have Cherokee in me.
Wow. So
Right.
it was a
But
belief.
it was a belief. It was part of our family history. And so I thought this was fascinating that, that there's this familial history that can be fictitious, but it could be true at the same time because the family believes it. So can you talk about that a little bit with Magdalena and Carly?
Yeah, I mean it's very similar, I think, to your experience. In my mind, the way that Magdalena has always been taught this and been raised to believe this has become pure truth to her, to the point where she's not really interested in for example, like a 23andMe, right? She wouldn't take it. She doesn't need it. She doesn't need any
Right.
confirmation.
Hmm.
And I think there's a line early on where she tells Carly, she came from an age when elders were believed. So she just believes. It's just pure belief, and it's really grounding to her to kind of have this piece of her identity to center her. And Carly is much more modern, I think, in that she wants to know truth, with the capital T, like the truth. I want to know if I don't believe that we really are. So many people have told me that we're not, and there's no way to prove this. And so what does this even matter? And I just really enjoyed portraying truth, and from two different angles. It was a lot of fun to write. Especially Magdalena's chapter from her point of view, where she's just kind of moving through life going, I believe what I believe. And that's going to shape everything that I see. That's going to shape this, when I see my son again, that's going to shape when I talk to my granddaughter. At the end, when she kind of has this moment where she's, looking at Carly and envisioning her late husband, like these are things that she believes are real. And I just loved playing with that and kind of asking the reader a bit, which I do as well, like kind of asking the reader a bit to question what we believe, right? Because we're so invested in what she thinks. And truth is going to be one thing, whether they are descendants of the Karankawa, remains to kind of be decided. And one thing I do think is worth mentioning, because I don't think any of the characters realize this until the very end, which is that they're not extinct at all. The Karankawa people have been around for as long as people have been thinking they're gone. And it's sort of the thing where, like many people's history kind of passed over them and just sort of went beyond them and said, okay, they're fine, they're gone, let's move on. But they've actually always been here. And so I just liked the idea of examining it a bit and questioning it a bit, because I think, like Carly, I have very modern sensibilities, and I want to know like specific things, if they're true or not. If I'm claiming them, I want to know if they're real. And but Magdalena just really doesn't need to know or care to know. This is what she believes, and she's gonna convince herself that that's the case, and it's going to color so much of her world, and it's going to shape how she raises Carly too.
Right. Yeah, I found that very interesting when I found out, well, my mother, grandmother, and great grandmother had all passed away by the time I took the test. But I sat there wondering, what they would say if I presented this to them.
Yeah.
As like, I always believed it to be true because the three of you all told me this, but then this says something very different. So
yeah, it's a big question. Like, at what point does it shake up your whole foundation? And rightfully so, maybe, if it's a people that have been oppressed for a long time, but also like, where do we belong? It gets back to that big question for the whole book, which is just who belongs where and to what people, and what does it mean to belong or to not.
I love this symbolic quote on page 68, and I want to read it. And then I want to talk to you about symbolism a little bit. But the quote goes, Oleanders, yes, she supposes she loved those about Galveston too, how they bear both beauty and death. And I really loved that too. And it really stood out in the paragraph where it was, because I was like, wow, this is very true. And can you talk about your relationship with symbolism? Is that something that you thought about when you were writing this book? Because there were a few really great nuggets in there that you had of things related to Galveston, nature, things that are part of the community. Can you talk about symbolism in your work?
Sure. I think it's hard for me not to not to see them when they're apparent. I mean, I was an English student for a long time, right? And I still teach it. So it's something about, when I see something and I recognize, God, that'd be a great symbol, like literally, let's just say that's a word. But I think they work best. I didn't intentionally go about looking for things that I knew would be symbolic and putting them in the book, if that makes sense. I think it just doesn't, it falls flat if I do that. It feels a little too forced. It gets a little, 8th grade English teacher, like hammering the scarlet letter into the students' brains about what it symbolizes, right? It gets a little Hawthorne. But I think that there were a lot of places where I would incorporate things that just rang true or felt resonant to me. And I would realize as I was writing them, or I would go back and read, that those were carrying symbolic weight. And that's a good feeling. I feel like the places where I would surprise myself with moments like that, or images or lines, were the most satisfying moments, because I knew that I hadn't forced them in there, but they're singing to each other in this really hopefully very true way. So yeah, nothing too forced. Oleanders is one where I think I was looking at when I portrayed Galveston or Uvalde or Brownsville or any of these places that I really do love, and I deeply love, but I think it's easy to fall into the trap of making them look great all the time, only focus on the good stuff. And same with characters, right? You love them so much that you just want them to be good, and you want everybody to love them, but that's not real for the way that people are, and places are. So I kept looking for places where I could identify, some of the ugly or some of the flaws, and something like oleanders, which I do think are really beautiful, and when they're in bloom, and they're everywhere on the island, and they're gorgeous to see. But I was also taught over and over not to touch them, not to touch my face, not to not to mess with them because they're bad. Something like that just feels true for the island, or true for these places, because it's both good and bad. It has beauty, but it has flaws too.
Right. And so that's a nice lead into the next quote that I have from page 112. You wrote, "To love this place is to love its bad parts también." So why is it that you think that you have to love the bad parts of places?
I actually personally don't think you have to love them. I think love is the strong word. I believe Magdalena believes that.
Right.
That she's just got to love all of it. All of it is hers, and all of it belongs, and all of it is part of her, and so she loves every single bit of it. I think that to be from somewhere, and to be proud of it, or to be proud of where you're from, you have to accept all the bad. I wouldn't say you have to love it. There's things about the places where I'm from that I don't necessarily love, but it's the same reaction as like too much whitewashing. Like if you just ignore all the bad, then you don't have this real sense of the place, and how authentic is it to say that you love it or that you're proud of it. To acknowledge the bad along with the good makes it more true. It makes it more whole. So I feel it's more, when I can say that I love Uvalde or that I love Galveston, it's to also acknowledge the ugly in all of those.
Right. So I saw recently that your book was written up in the New York Times. That must have been a crazy experience for you.
Yeah, I'm not really over it. Like I keep seeing pictures, and I think actually next Sunday it'll be out too, in one of the book review features. And I'm not like necessarily okay right now. I keep kind of thinking about it, and I'm going, no, that's the New York Times. Like it's hard to kind of get past it. But oh wow, so grateful. And just really honored. And I think 12-year-old Kim who wanted to be a writer would be pretty jazzed right now. So I'm trying to be super excited for her.
So what have you learned in this process then as a debut author that let's something to share with the writing community, right? What have you learned from the publication process of your book, the long gestation period, going through the editing with your editing team, and then now having it out in the world, and things like being in the New York Times? What stands out the most for you in this process?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think that I've still got that debut author sense of wonder and gratitude. I hope I don't lose that. You know, if I'm lucky enough to publish a lot more books, I hope that I maintain that, because it's such a gift, and it's hard to feel like it's reality when it's been your dream for so long, which is the truth for a lot of writers, right? We wanted to be writers when we were little. And I think the biggest thing that I've learned, on top of that, just being grateful and being proud, is really the amount of stamina that it takes. Like that every stage is going to sort of test you and try you. And I think as writers, or at least I did, I tend to think that the hard parts were over when I wrote the thing. You know, I had the draft, and then I revised the draft, and I had the manuscript after multiple revisions, and I was like, all right, I'm ready. This is the hard part is done. It's written. No, actually, there's a lot of hard parts after that.
Mhm.
So I think just acknowledging, like, at every stage there's going to be more work to be done, and that's just because I wanted to see how high it could go. You know, I knew
Mhm.
I wanted to publish it, and I wanted to publish it at a particular level, so I willingly went through all these steps, right? And that they took a while, and they took a lot of brain power and a lot of energy, and honestly a lot of creative energy. There were months where I didn't write anything, because I was focused on revising, or I was focused on
Yeah.
writing query letters, or even pre-publicity. You know, you're thinking about like writing letters to booksellers, or you're thinking about sending things to influencers. And so there's just a lot of stages that I had no idea existed, and then certainly didn't anticipate like how much work they would be. but
Right.
but all good things, you know, like these are not things that I'm gonna go home and cry about. Like, they're just things that I learned. And I hope that emerging writers and anyone who wants to publish at these particular levels, bears that in mind. You know, it really is a marathon, and I was thinking it was, you know, the hard running was done, and there was much more running to be done.
Right. I think it's funny when I hear young writers say, all I want to do is write. And it's
Yeah.
like, well, if you want to get published, there's just so much that you have to do.
Yeah, writing is, you know, I try to teach that to my students a lot, because I have so many who are English majors, or they're creative writing majors, because they love to write, but they want to publish too. And I'm saying, loving writing and wanting to publish are kind of two different things. You know, you
Yeah.
can be a writer and write forever, and write things that, you know, your parents or your best friend or your partner will read, and then you go back to your day job, you know. But if you want to publish, that's a whole different ball game. And um it takes a lot of energy too, like a lot of creative energy, and a lot of work, quite frankly. So that's been the most interesting thing to learn, um and to kind of tuck away, because now I'm working on the second book, and I'm remembering, you know, like all of the effort that goes into the later stages, um and thinking about putting them aside, and thinking of the important work again, which is the writing. You
Mhm.
know, like going back to just writing this thing as best I can.
Right. Yeah. It's always every book that I've written, I come to the end and I think, the writing part was my favorite part.
Yeah.
Even though I know I have all these other things I have to do, but it's a nice reminder to kind of get back into it and be like, oh yeah, this is why I was doing it, because I really
Yeah.
love
You're
the
like in
writing
the
part.
thick of writing right now, right? Like I feel like I see your updates about, you know,
Right.
how many words you've written. I mean, it's a job. It's real work.
I'm writing my 10th book right now.
Oh, it's amazing.
My ninth book I sold to TCU Press, but it's not coming out until, thank you, it's not coming out until 2024.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get another one in the back pocket done before then.
Amazing. Yep. Yeah. And then just where the focus goes, right? Because once that book is like getting ready to be published, and then you have to think about all the things about launching a book into the world, which has been a really cool learning experience, I think.
Right. One of the things I learned a few books ago that I really dislike is narrating audiobooks.
Oh, did you narrate
I
yours?
narrated one and it was harder than writing the whole
Yeah.
book. It
No,
was
I
so
think
frustrating.
I'm kudos to even doing it. I think they early on they asked me if I really felt moved to narrate, I could. And I said, I don't think I am very moved to narrate. Let's see what other people with more experience in this could do. And I was so pleased with how it turned out. And they got multiple voices. So I didn't have to, nobody would have to sit there listening to me imitate
Nice.
this. So, but yeah, that's extra work. And that's hard. I was just talking a couple weeks ago, or I guess now I don't even know what day it is. It's September now. Last month, I did an event with Elizabeth McCracken, and she was talking about how she had just finished narrating her latest book, or her latest audiobook, and how hard it was.
Yes.
So that's a skill.
Right.
Congratulations.
It's just like writing is a skill. I mean, when you hear someone who's a professional compared to when you do it, even though they're your own words,
Yeah.
not the
Yeah.
same. So
Agreed.
what is being an assistant professor taught you, as a writer dealing with students? What have you learned by teaching writing?
Oh, I learned so much. It's kind of a cliche to have the teacher say, well, the students taught me, but it's real. I think every time I go in a classroom and I take such joy out of, especially a creative writing classroom. I teach literature too, but a creative classroom, I take such joy out of just sharing, things that I've learned or things that I've experienced. But also learning from them, like these are students with various levels of writing and publication, and experience, and also just really beautiful readers. They're so ravenous for anything connected to the writing and literary world. And so that's just a fun space to be in, like, as we all just nerd out together. I think the thing that I gain the most from being a professor is time management. That's kind of a dorky answer, but it's true. I think the more I'm in a classroom and kind of have to focus on educating and things like grading and things like lecture, the more I don't have space for writing. And so I have to kind of create the space for writing. And so that allows me to kind of talk with the students about, who are full-time students and parents and have jobs, to kind of talk about, well, maybe if the world doesn't really want us to sit and write, how do we find space for that? And that's kind of a joy too, to remind ourselves that if it's this important to us, that we make space. And I think that I always just work best when I have to make space for writing, because it feels indulgent. It feels important and crucial, and it's vital to me to have time to write. And so I will carve out time to do it when I should be grading. So getting to be in the classroom with people who are as enthusiastic and as hungry to learn as I was and still am is really a gift. Yeah.
All right, now's the time in our show for the lightning round. It's a concept we stole from inside the actor's studio.
I remember inside the actor's studio. Yeah.
Right. But they stole it from Bernard Pivot. He stole it from Marcel Proust, and it goes on and on. So, Kimberly Garza, are you ready for the lightning round?
I think so.
Excellent. So, what is your favorite word?
Scathing is probably my favorite word. I don't use it enough, I think, because it's so special to me, but I just love that word, scathing.
Yeah, it sounds nice. Vicious. What's your least favorite word?
I'm pretty basic, like everybody else. I don't think I like the word moist. It just it's very common, but it's true. I cringe a little every time I hear it. So yeah.
Yeah, I know. What turned you on?
I think good humor. Yeah. Being somebody who can smile through the world and kind of encourage others to laugh or to chuckle a little bit. That puts me in a good mood.
Right. So what turned you off then?
I really don't like rudeness. That's kind of broad, but just being inconsiderate of others and self-centered, just rudeness really turns me off. Ugh.
Yeah, me too. What is your idea of happiness?
There's so many good ones. So one thing I think is very specific, maybe to other people who've experienced this with families, is that I get a lot of joy out of falling asleep when I can hear like my family in the background, if that makes sense. Like everybody's partying or everybody's celebrating in the other room and I'm laying down on the couch and kind of dozing. It's just something very comforting and safe and joyful about that. Like I do it all the time, which feels like I'm not part of the party, but I am. But I like hearing them in the background and
right.
Taking a snooze.
They're your white noise, right?
Yeah, exactly. The best white noise.
Right. So who's your favorite author?
This is a mean question, Scott. It's so mean. I was looking at this and I went, I don't know how I'm supposed to choose one. I can say one of my favorite. I have so many. I think I come back to her a lot, but she really is one of the foundational ones for me, is Sandra Cisneros.
Okay.
I read her, as a young student when I still couldn't think that literature could be about or written by people like me. And I go back to her work a lot when I'm in need of just kind of refocusing. And it's really beautiful. Yeah. So I'd say Sandra Cisneros.
Excellent. So if you could be a character from a well-known novel, who would that be?
Oh man. Okay. I got during the heart of the COVID pandemic when we were all isolating, I got really into the Louise Penny books, where she writes about Armand Gamache and Inspector Gamache in Canada. And I think the way that she writes that his village and the people who get really invested in these crimes and as he's solving them, I would totally be a character in one of the Inspector Gamache books. The way she writes snow is probably a little troubling for me as a Texan. I
right.
don't think I could survive in that kind of winter, but the springtime, summertime ones, I could be a character in one of those books.
Yeah, I spent time in Montana over the winter and I tell you, it's no good.
It's too much.
Much snow. What profession other than your own would you want to attempt?
What I want to attempt, I have so much respect because I have so many family members, including my parents. I wish I could have been a medical professional, like a nurse or a doctor. I have so much respect for them, and my family works really hard and they're so good at it. It's such a beautiful service. I was not cut out to do it. I thought I would be for a while, but it turned out not to be the case. But I would have loved to see a different timeline in which I'm a, medical Dr. Garza or
Dr. Garza,
or
right?
Yeah.
Medical doctor.
Yep.
So what profession would you least want to try?
Oh, anything with politics, anything with government. I just don't. I like the role that I have now. I want zero to do with policy making, I think.
Right. Yeah, it's tough.
And yeah, that's hard.
All right, last one. So if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you reach the check-in desk?
The front desk. So let's see. I would like to hear, welcome, Kim. Your mom has been here and she's making all of us a little crazy. Can you go entertain her, please?
Excellent.
Which I completely believe about my late mother. So yeah, I'd love to hear that.
All right, Kimberly Garza, author of Las Karankawas, excellent book. Everybody go out and buy it. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Scott. Thanks for having me.
This has been a presentation of Austin Liti Limits, made possible with help from our good friends at Blue Ink Review, where typing "the end" is just the beginning. Find out more at blueinkreview.com.